I get to share this morning one of my favorite stories, and I've said that every week, but it's been true every week as well. And I kind of debated a little bit about whether to share this story because I basically preach it about every third week here at 828 Church. Somewhere in my teaching or preaching, Harrison, this story shows up. Like I'm always referencing this story, so you can tell that it means a lot to me. And so when I was kind of debating whether I would actually specifically share from it, Jacob pointed out that he put it on the graphic. He said, look, it's on the graphic, so you have to preach it, which I don't know that makes any sense. But again, apparently I'm getting bossed a lot right now, which is probably a good thing for everybody. And so I said, okay, that's a good enough reason for me, which really means that I wanted to share it anyway. And it's the story you'll see here in the bottom left corner of the graphic where Jesus is walking on water. Peter is doing his praise as he goes down pose. I don't even know what that is. And, but the Sunday school series has been about those stories from God's Word that are just so common that sometimes we've missed a lot of what is in them. I think we've heard them so much that maybe we've lost a bit of the impact and meaning we're meant to kind of carry into all that we do every day. And there's so much in this story. A little bit of the setup of this story is that it happens in a pretty tight chronological time frame with some other incredible events in the life of the Christ. And first of all, what we find in the Gospels is that Jesus has just heard about the death of his very close friend and first cousin, John the Baptist. So that was something that happened just before this event happened. And essentially, they were in an area across the Sea of Galilee, and when he heard about John the Baptist, that wasn't just that he had lost a close friend or a ministry compadre, but also it had a lot to do with probably what he was dealing with in his own choices to follow the Father into this destiny he had as the Messiah. I think sometimes it's easy to overlook, Rodney, the reality that Jesus was cloaked. Even though he was God, he was fully God, he was also fully human and fully man. So the Son of God cloaked in humanity had to have faith to believe that he was called to be the Messiah. Sometimes when I consider that kind of faith, it makes it a little bit easier for me to believe that I can have the faith to follow him, that he had to have the faith to believe in the assignment that he had, which was so much more significant than any faith that's ever required, I think, of us. And then he hears now what he knows is prophetically destined to happen, that his ministry compadre has died, and he's destined to die too. I mean, that's got to push you to a different place of consecration and prayer. And so he says, okay, well, let's just leave this scene, this situation. Let's get across to the other side. So they boat across the Sea of Galilee, which is about 64. It's a body of water that's about 64 square miles. It's not small. It's also not huge. It's 13 miles long at its longest. It's about 6 miles wide at its widest. And they sail probably from somewhere around Bethsaida and Capernaum over to somewhere on the western shore. But when they get there, the word that they're there has spread so rapidly that he once again draws an incredibly huge crowd because of the miracles that have been being accomplished. And all these people show up, Marie, looking for ministry, looking for a miracle. And Jesus, in his compassion, doesn't turn them away. This is an amazing part of this story, is that Jesus, in his compassion, doesn't turn them away. One of the things about ministry in a lot of the third world, and certainly in southern Africa this is true, but this is true in the third world all over the planet, you rarely ever find atheism. Atheism isn't very common in the third world or in the bush. Most people believe in God. But the ministry and the message that has to be communicated in the third world isn't, is there a God, but is he good? Yeah. Come on, somebody, that's the question. The real question that's being asked is he good? And does he care about me? Or is he mad at me? Or is he disconcerted about me? That's the real question of communicating. One of the most important and powerful things that we learn from this story, and even this preceding portion of this passage, is that he does care. He does care. I mean, come on, us, right? All of us. This is all of us. We get tired. Okay, we get hangry. Come on. Hungry and angry wrapped up together. We get impatient. We get impertinent. And sometimes we just are at a point physically and emotionally where we just can't care about anybody but us, right? But not Jesus. There's so much we see in this story just about the character. I want you to hear this because it's important for your heart. Right? I want you to understand the nature and character of God. When you're going through crisis, when life is hard for you, I want you to know about Jesus. and what he's willing to do. Did he need some time away? Yes, he did. But when the crowd showed up, the Bible says that he ministered to them compassionately. And then, all right, get this, he even did lunch, right? Right? The miracle that happened just before this story that we were about to look at is that Jesus fed 5,000 men plus women and children. Who does that? Like, why not just say go home? I mean, it's lunch. You're not starving. Just go home, right? Right. But he's such a compassionate God. All right. I want you to sit back in your seat just for a quick minute at home, in the house. I want you to sit back in your seat for a second, and I want you to remember how much he loves you. Isn't it cool when someone loves you that way? When you know that you can't inconvenience them. They love you so much that even being inconvenienced isn't an inconvenience, Betty, because they just want to love you, right? They just want to love you like it is something that is a part of what makes them who they are and puts joy in their heart, even when it's hard, right, to still get to love you. That's God. Amen. I just want you to hear that this morning. That's God for you. More than it could ever be about anybody else. The person who loves you most doesn't even come close to loving you the way Jesus does. Ooh, that ought to do something up inside your heart right now. In fact, the first takeaway for us this morning is even while grieving, Jesus put others first. That's amazing. He was grieving the loss of a close friend and cousin and ministry compadre, and he still put others first. And then, this morning's story, Matthew 14:22. This story, by the way, is found in three of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John. I suspect that Matthew certainly gave us the most detailed account, which is a common truth about the Gospels. Matthew, and I love the way they play his character in the series The Chosen, if you've seen that, but I believe that might well be fairly accurate. But Matthew was definitely someone who took all of the stories and gave us, I think, the most detail from them. He gave the redacted versions of those stories, and he said, okay, here's what you don't want to miss in this story, and he included incredible details, and but there are also some important things about this story in the book of Mark and an extremely brief version of it in the book of John. And Matthew 14:22, the word says this, immediately after this, so immediately after feeding the 5,000, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross the other side of the lake or sea. Now remember, I said that they got into the boat when they heard about John the Baptist having been murdered by Herod. So they sailed across the sea, and to get a little bit of time away, Johnny, so good to see you and Nancy in the house this morning. And they sailed across the sea to get away, but they didn't get away. There was all kind of folk there that still had needs, and so he ministered to their needs. Then he put his disciples back in the boat, which I love this as a leader. He's still trying to get them a little bit of a break. So he sends them back across in the boat to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. So he dispersed the crowd, and after sending them, the people, home, he went up to the hills by himself to pray, and not fell while he was there alone. Now they're leaving, Ricky, the west side of the Sea of Galilee, and they're sailing back across, and John tells us that they headed toward Capernaum. Most believe probably back to the area of Bethsaida, maybe because that's where some of the disciples, including Peter, that was their hometown, so they were heading back home. This wasn't a stretch of the sea that they would have been in any way unfamiliar with, but while they were on their way, a huge storm came. Does this ever happen to you? I mean, Jesus is the one that put them in the boat. Kind of a first takeaway in regards to that is just that they were doing what God said do when God said do it, and they still faced difficulty. I mean, I could say I don't know how to break this to you, but I know precisely how to break this to you. I'm just going to break this to you. Come on. Doing God's will does not guarantee on any level that you're not going to face difficulty. There, I said it. And it's funny because I think we all know that right here. And I don't feel like there's anybody in this room that says, well, if I follow God's will, we all know, it's no guarantee that life will be, quote, the proverbial bed of roses. We've been hearing that since we were big enough to be hearing stuff, right? But still, when we're following God and life goes hard, we act all like surprised and whatever. Come on. So I don't know, we know it here, but sometimes here we're like, what? That ain't fair. Come on. We just act all like indignant about it. And It reminds me of what Paul said when he said, look, I've fought a good fight. Right? I've finished my course. I kept the faith. He didn't say, boy, I started following God and everything got easy. But I don't even say that to predict that your life's going to be difficult. Everybody faces difficulty. That's just a part of what happens. But this story points it out so well, it would be amiss not to mention it. They were doing exactly what God said do when God said do it. Verse 24, meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. So Jesus went up on a mountain to pray, and they were in the boat, going where they were instructed to go, doing what they were instructed to do, and they faced a strong wind. And I know we've all experienced situations and seasons like this. We all have. Like I could have said, have you ever? But that would have been a ridiculous question, Tony, because of course we all have. We've all have faced seasons and situations when we faced a crazy, hectic, heavy wind. Proverbially, literally, we live in hurricane, town, so we've seen wind. But I'm talking spiritually right now. In fact, I love the way the ESV translates verse 24. It says, the wind was against them. Maybe that's you this morning. Maybe not. Maybe you got a tailwind and you're loving it, right? When we were flying to Southern Africa several weeks ago now, Chris, we caught a tailwind 140 miles an hour. Unbelievable. I mean, I always watch the map. If you fly over the ocean now, the planes, you can watch yourself flying across the ocean. Like you've got a flight map and you can see how high you are, how fast you're going, how far you are from where you left, what the time. I mean, this is incredible detail. And that's like my favorite movie to watch on a plane. I'm just keeping up with where we are, man. If we go down, I'm going to be, hey, real quick, let me tell you. I'll take a picture of the screen. This is where we were right before we did a belly flop in the ocean. Just kidding. But not going to be there, hallelujah. Anywho, but we caught an incredible tailwind, and we were going about 740 miles an hour. That happens sometimes too. Maybe that's the season you're in. You're walking in just a grace that just is getting you where you're going in a way that you can't believe, and that's often the case for us. So let's don't make it like we never have a tailwind, because we more often than not do. But occasionally we face a headwind. We got one of those on the way back, and it took a little longer to get home, but we still got there. The wind was against them. Often when the wind is against us, we hit the give up button. Like, this can't be God, right? I mean, it can't be, if it's this hard, it can't be him. That's often what we think. Like we get into this situation, maybe it's a relationship, or maybe it's a job, or maybe it's something we felt like God called us to do, and then it gets hard. Right? That was preacher exasperation right there. Come on, man, push through. Can I just encourage you this morning? Come on, push through. Believe in what God has said to you enough to push through difficulty if you face it. And stop hitting the give up button. Or the go back button. I wish we could just take that out, right? Just take the go back button out, right? They talk about that in the Old Testament. It won't go back to Egypt. Really? Really, Moses trying to lead you to the promised land, you face one little Red Sea. Okay, I get it. The Red Sea is a big deal. I get it. Was it too big for God? Anybody? How about a little dry ground? Maybe the difficulty you're facing is you're set up for a miracle. How about a little faith in the house this morning? How about a little faith in the house this morning? They wanted to hit the go back button. And Moses and God just opened up the sea. And I've been there. I've been there lots of times. In fact, the aforementioned just most recent Africa trip. I'm probably going to be talking about that for a few weeks. But, David. I mean, we got there, and immediately there was an obvious and intense pressure, especially regarding COVID. They were having another wave, and there was like the Delta variant and all this kind of stuff, and people closing stuff down. And it would have been easy. Maybe some of you back here who were getting those prayer requests from us were thinking they shouldn't have went. Maybe I thought that once or twice. I should have come alone. I'm risking everybody, right? I don't think I did. And then, but the flip side of that is you could say, boy, all this difficulty, God must have wanted them there. Right? You can pick your interpretation. Boy, have I experienced that. Here comes a classic Ron story. So years ago, and Karen and I were kind of really first getting more into vocational ministry spaces. I was offered an opportunity to speak at an area ministers gathering, and I was a young preacher in my mid-20s. They called them back then, they called those fellowship meetings. And I did the morning session. A bunch of pastors and preachers were there, and somebody gave me a space I certainly hadn't earned, but I think God was in it. I preached, and after that, I got invited to be a youth pastor. Like a pastor approached me and said, hey, we're looking for a youth pastor. We lived out in the country in north central Arkansas. This was in Little Rock. That was the big city to me, and we were asked if we would come. And man, in that circle of church ministry, that meant a tryout. So you're supposed to come. Now, this guy had gotten to hear me preach, but he wanted me to come and preach at his church and preach for the deacons, right? And then meet with them afterward about whether we were going to be their youth pastors or not. So we made a plan for a couple of weeks away. We would come on a Sunday night, and I would preach. It was about an hour and a half drive, and it was Karen and I actually had a pretty new car, but her parents were going to Clovis, New Mexico to visit family, and we loaned them our car. And then this all happened, and my brother said, well, just take my car. This was in the mid-'80s. He had an '87 Nissan Sentra. This is all pertinent to the story, trust me. So we, went to our home church that Sunday morning, the church I'd grown up in, that we were serving in a pretty high volunteer capacity. So there were mixed emotions there about whether we should go or stay. But we took off to drive this hour and a half to this church to try out to be the youth pastors, and we got about halfway there, and the car quit. My brother's car just conked out on the side of the road. No cell phones or anything like that, obviously. So I had to walk to a payphone and call the pastor and say, man, I'm just really sorry, but we're not going to make it. It's not happening. Not going to make it this morning or this evening, sorry. And I'm thinking he's going to say, yeah, okay, just never mind. Forget the whole thing. But he says, no, it's fine. Just come next week. Because he had to come up with a message on the spur of the moment or extend worship. I don't know what he did. But that next week was incredible. Like that whole next week, listening to different people decide what was the source of our breakdown. Man, God really don't want you to go. You're supposed to stay here. Hallelujah. This is a sign from the Lord. Come on. A whole lot of that. Yeah. Medea did go to that church. Not true. And then there were other people, and I didn't know how to take this at all. Oh, the devil's trying to keep you from going. You should definitely go. So apparently we had a few detractors in that church as well. You should go. You definitely want to overcome, And I prayed about it. I don't remember that week just really struggling with what happened. We were doing what we felt like God said do, and then boom, the wind was against us. What happened? And I had this, I felt like the voice of the Lord really spoke to me. And he said, the fuel pump went out. Well, the mechanic also said the same thing. The fuel pump. So then you're like, was it the devil? Was it God? Was it the devil? Or was it Nissan? Years later, true story, about 5 years later, incidentally, we went the next week, tried out, became the youth pastor, et cetera, et cetera. Still not sure that was God, but that's what happened. And then several years later, we were doing university ministry in Louisiana, and a guy gave us a 1987 Nissan Sentra, gray, just like the one my brother had owned. And the fuel pump went out 3 times. 3 times. In fact, the part was recalled. A takeaway for us this morning. Yes, I got one. Determining the direction of the wind is no way to discern the will of God. Yeah. That's a big deal in this story. Listen, I'm for it. If you can get a tailwind, I'm for it. Like if we can make good decisions, wise, discerning decisions, and get a tailwind, but it should never keep us from going where God said go. The direction of the wind should never be the determining factor in discerning the will of God. If God said go and it's hard, go. Just go. And be glad you did. We'll get to that in just a quick minute. If we put our focus on faith, not finding fault, we'll find Jesus being faithful as always. That's what we'll find. I should have put that on the screen, right? And it's absolutely true. If we put our focus on faith, not finding fault, we'll always find Jesus being what he's always been, which is faithful. Spend a little time with that this morning if there's something you're dealing with today. Trust God and watch God come through, because Mark 6:48 tells us, Jesus, saw they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and waves. And I just love that. I brought that in from the version that Mark shares with us because I think it's critically important to know, DeMarcus, that he sees us. Like, we're not somehow like lost in this wind, this storm, this difficulty, and God somehow can't see that. Like the God of creation is capable of seeing our situation and knowing how to get to us in it. Now, there was a bit of a dilemma here, Miss Nancy, because again, Jesus is cloaked in humanity. I mentioned that already. This isn't the Holy Spirit coming to them. This is Jesus presently in the flesh. But Matthew 14:25 tells us, and in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them. What? Somebody say, what? He came to them. Oh, man. Oof. Come on, somebody. Somebody that has had Jesus come to you. Come on, somebody. Just, I like that. Throw that hand up. You've had Jesus. He came to you. He came to them. Walking on water. Do whatever's necessary. Jesus will do whatever is necessary. Boy, and does he have to get through some stuff sometimes to get to our hearts. Yeah. I mean, we pile all kinds of stuff in the way. But he will still do whatever he has to do. Man, and in the fourth watch of the night, somewhere between 3 and 4, he came to them walking on the sea. One of our friends that's watching this morning from Southport is a man named R.W. Underwood, just an awesome new friend that I gotten to make recently. And R.W., he fought a big, bad battle with COVID earlier this year. And he's going to share this testimony over and over, and I'm sure we're going to make an 828 Redemption Story video of this story. But when he went to the ER, they literally told him that he had a 16% chance of walking out. I want to know how they come up with the math. Man, I ain't hating on the medical profession. I love our doctors and all those frontline workers who have helped us in this pandemic. But I have another friend that said they gave him a 3%. I want to know where that factoring machine is, where they figure that out. 16%. 16%. All I know, though, is that the odds were long for R.W., and he said, well, what they said at the ER was you won't walk out. It was the doctor who gave him a 16% chance and told him you need to say goodbyes to your family. And then a couple of 3 days later, he was setting up doing work. And then he walked out, and they literally call him Miracle Man. Now, I know that that's not everybody's story. I get that. God does healings on both sides of eternity, and I'm glad. Come on, somebody. He's not limited to healing here. But I also know that when you're in a situation that you yourself are incapable of getting yourself out of, God comes and works miraculously. Verse 26 tells us, though, when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. And in fact, in their fear, they cried out, "It is a ghost." That happens sometimes too. Sometimes when William offers us a solution, we're like, that's scary. Anybody, the thing that God asked you to do, like the step of faith you were called to take, you felt like you couldn't do it, like it was scary. Like even that, just like, I don't know if I can trust again. I don't know if I can hope again. I don't know if I can step again. Ooh, that's. I mean, we just sang the song, "Fear doesn't stand a chance," right? But, I mean, the song's great, but the reality sometimes is a little more difficult. And they thought he was a ghost. Now, okay, here we go, classic Ron telling of this story. But when I hear this part of the story, incidentally, if you don't know me, I'm the youngest of 5, all right, 3 older sisters. My oldest sister, Mary Jane, is Down syndrome, and she went to be with Jesus in 2009. She was the princess of our family. I always say that when I speak of her. But nonetheless, the youngest brother with 3 older sisters. So a word you could definitely use to describe me would be mischievous. I'm not sure if that comes out in my preaching, but it's real. And I especially loved as a kid to spook my sisters, startle them. I don't prefer to use the word scared, but I did scare them quite a lot. And if I had been Jesus in this story, oh my goodness, you're so glad I'm not Jesus. Well, I would have had everybody walking on water, for real, right? I mean, when they thought he was a ghost, what a perfect opportunity. This says a lot about the character of the Christ, too, because I would have been like, ooh, I mean, I'll make it right in a minute. Right? I mean, I'm going to save him anyway. I mean, he's Jesus. He's already, like, walking in amazing faith and on the water. And they like, he's a ghost. Oh, at this point, like, I'm like, whoop. I'm under the waves. On the other side of that boat. So they're all like, I saw him over there. It looked like a ghost. Right? But I done come up on the other side of the boat. Hey, guys. That was creepy, right? Everybody walks on water for a minute. Just for a minute. I mean, they're moving so fast, they're all walking on water, right? Right? Oh, my goodness. And I used to hide in my sister's closet. That was so bad. They would be sitting on the hood of the car in the driveway talking to the girlfriends with their feet dangling down, and I would crawl in there and grab a foot or something. I got whooped for that, too. I did get whooped for that. But Jesus, not so much. That's just not who he is. And I will say this, too, just before I read that next scripture about what his response to them was. But sometimes, life can be really scary. I'm not trying to make light of that either. I mean, some things happen that are they're intimidating, and they can be overwhelming. I don't think I got them a picture of this in time. I meant to, but actually, if you've been on my social media at all since the Africa trip, while we were in the bush, Lindsay Wallace, who's in Southport this morning, but Lindsay, yeah, if you got that picture, put it up there. But Lindsay, yeah. So, there's another picture as well that this is a baboon spider. This spider was actually initially on her dress. It was on her dress. It's a big boy, too. I was impressed with him. That's a big boy spider. I'm not actually afraid of spiders, so I know most of you are, I see your faces right now. I'm definitely a minority in this one. But she was over there with this huge baboon spider on her dress. And she's holding her dress like this, and her voice was amazing. She says, "Ron," we're out in the bush in the camp. So the first one was Ron, the second was Ron, and then the third one escalated even from there, and so I ran over and got it off. I actually thought it was a wolf spider, which they're completely non-poisonous, but it was big for a wolf spider, so I Googled it later. It was actually a baboon spider, which has a neurotoxin, but who knew? It's not deadly, so don't panic. It just hurts, but I didn't get bitten. You know what? I understand this, I guess. I really just wanted to share that picture. But I do know sometimes life is legitimately scary. And there are still things in my life that I have definitively to just consistently hand to him. There are places where mostly my concern for other people can really become a burden that transitions from right concern to fear. And I'm often looking for Jesus in that situation. But here's what Jesus said. Even in the middle of something that was incredibly intimidating, Jesus spoke to them at once and said, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I am here." Whew. Man, again, I want that to soak in for a second. I want you to think about that. Like, here's what Jesus is saying. Take courage. Why? Come on, Karen Crest, this morning. I mean, you know what I'm saying. Like in the middle of it, right? What is the power that carries us through a devastating diagnosis to the other side of healing? What is it? It's the promise of his presence. Hey, you don't sneak up on the other side of the boat and say, "Boo." He says, "Don't be afraid." Right? Take courage. I don't know who that's for, but I'm sure it's for someone this morning. I am here. Courage isn't something, another takeaway we produce, but something we find in the power of his presence. Amen. If this morning there's something that you're battling, and again, sometimes it can just be a fear in regards to destiny, like, is this ever going to work out, or is my marriage ever going to be whole, or am I ever going to be married, or is this job, am I always going to be in this space? Well, I don't know what it is. I don't know. There's a lot of pontification and speculation in that, but what I know is this, that whatever it is that feels a bit too much for you, you're not going to conjure courage to push through it, but if you'll push into his presence, you'll find the courage you need. That's why it's just such a beautiful reality, Carly, that the right answer is always push into Jesus. I love that. It's not complicated. I don't have to figure out a new solution for my current situation. The right answer is always. How are you responding to the storms in your life today? Ooh, I'd like to make a suggestion. Get closer to God than you've ever been. Which was a bit of a dilemma in this story, right? Because Jesus was over there. And I love this too. Then Peter, seeing Jesus over there, said to him, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you. Now, this is the part of the story we generally focus on, right? But tell me to come to you walking on water. In other words, here's what Peter is saying. If I'm here, and you're there, I'd like to relocate. And the translation of this, if it's really you, the if isn't the big and important word in this. This wasn't so much an if, Melissa. It wasn't like if that's really you. It's almost, most translators believe this, it's almost as if he was saying, since that's you, wait, so get the inflection like this. If you're there, if that's really you, then can I come over there? Where are you today? Oof. If that's you. And what did Jesus say? Yes, come. Well, that's a little bit to do to get there. From where I am presently, in my faithless, fearful state, to get where you are is going to take some faith. But not in me. My faith doesn't need to be in me. My faith needs to be in you. So Peter went over the side of the boat. Have you ever gone over the side of the boat? Ever done that? Did you ever just go over the side of the boat? Here I come. Over the side of the boat. Man, I'm going to write that on my mirror. Let's go over the side of the... Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on water toward Jesus. There's no way to overstate how incredible that is. There's no way. Here's what Peter had realized. Jesus is actually safer. Last takeaway. Jesus is actually safer than the ship.
Yeah. That's it.
Hey, Julia, there's a strong argument to make in this story for staying in the ship. And 11 of the 12 made it. I mean, we're in a storm, and it appears that we're destined to die, but at least we are still in the boat. But there was one guy who had a revelation, an epiphany. Jesus is actually safer. Than the ship. And then the story finishes. But when he saw the strong wind and waves, he was terrified and began to sink. I feel like this is a little overpreached. That's why I'm only sharing it here in the end and not going to spend a ton of time on it. Peter gets picked on for this. I have a ton of respect for folks who got their hair wet for God and others. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I don't. So he sank, just setting himself up to be saved. Oof. The word of the Lord to me, I can't remember if I shared this, but the word of the Lord to me about a month ago, I was speaking at a church planters and revitalization event. Pretty sure I said this out loud here, but it might have just been to our staff team. But the word the Lord spoke to me was, give me something to do. Now, this was like from a ministry vision leadership perspective, but I felt like the word of the Lord was, give me something to do. Mallory, God was like, trust me. Hand me the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. Give me something to do. Be that guy that shows up with more than he can handle just because I said so. Give me something to do. Come on. Peter gave God something to do. I mean, Jesus was going to save him anyway. But Peter... And guess what Jesus did when Peter started to sink? He said, where did Peter go? Holy smoke, I lost Peter. Oh, well, I got 11 other disciples, and they're all still in the boat. That's good news. We'll be fine. Is that what he said? Jesus, Peter shouted, save me, Lord. Really technical prayer. Well thought out. Deep, theological. Save me. And Jesus dilly-dallied. I'm thinking about it. Immediately reached out and grabbed him. Oh, come on. Somebody, thank God for the immediately. Thank God. I know we say sometimes he's never early. All right, I get it. I mean, we have to wait. Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. But I want you to know this, you're never waiting on him to save you. You're not, you may be in a process that's important to your growth and discipleship, but you're not waiting on Jesus. God's always working. As we sang last week in the song Waymaker, even when I can't see it, you're working. You're not waiting on Jesus. You might be waiting on you in the process that he's taking you through, but you're not waiting on Jesus. Immediately, Jesus reached out and grabbed him and corrected him. You have so little faith, but you was walking on water. I just like to throw that in. Jesus said, why did you doubt me? And then when they climbed back in the boat, the wind stopped. The disciples worshiped him. Mark tells us they were immediately at shore when Jesus got back in the boat, which happened the other time when they were in a storm and they woke him. So if I was the disciples and I was trying to get across the Sea of Galilee, I would always pray for a storm. Just be a storm chaser, because as soon as Jesus sorts the storm, you're going to be at shore. You don't have to row anymore. Come on out, worship team. Then the disciples worshiped him and said, you really are. You really are. You really are the Son of God. There's no storm too big today for a God who always sees and always comes and who always can and will save. And your best plans and designs for your own safety and protection, i.e. the boat, the ship, are not safer than the Savior. In fact, Jesus is actually safer than the ship. So trust him. Like, bring who you are to him. Bring your hurt, your heartache, or your hopes, just your hopes and dreams. Pray for a tailwind, but persist through a headwind. Don't let the wind decide or discern the will of God for you. Don't let difficulty deter you. Get rid of the go back and give up buttons. Just get rid of them. Get rid of them. Get rid of them. Sense it's you. Maybe there's a place in your life where you need to come and pray for some discernment. If it's you, maybe that's still a question, and if it is, ask it. But when you get an answer to it, then press in to his presence. That's where your courage is found. Press through the difficulty. I can do all things through Christ. Don't you give up. And then press on. I sound like a preacher right then. Press on to what God makes possible in spite of the storm. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see a miracle. You might even get to walk on water.